What's up, y'all? Zach with Living Corporate, and happy MLK weekend. You know, if you're listening to this on a Saturday, on the 16th, it's MLK Day weekend. I hope that you're taking the time to breathe and give yourself some sort of respite from the chaos that is this world today. And I also hope that you take some time to reflect on the work and words of MLK Jr., the work that he was able to accomplish, and really kind of dive into his philosophy. It's interesting how white America has whitewashed King into this all lives matter, very passive doormat of oppression, and not this radical socialist revolutionary that he was. It's interesting because if you go off of like mainstream media, it would lead you to believe that everyone loved Dr. King. But the reality is that he was hated. Honestly, the same things that they say about Black Lives Matter and various civil rights activists and the movements towards black liberation that we have today, they were saying the exact same thing and worse about Martin Luther King Jr. I think it's important to understand that, at least for me, as I look at his work, that he was focused on dismantling systems, right? He wasn't really focused on getting a bag. He wasn't focused on looking like he was making progress. He was looking and really examining how these systems, mainly these capitalistic systems and these militaristic systems, over-index and frankly just exploit the poor, black and brown people specifically, but then the poor at large. And I think it's important that as we think about where we need to go, that we have to keep our mind and our eyes on the systems at play, right? It's easy to zoom in on individuals. It's easy to zoom in on ticky-tack, oh, this person did this person did not do that, as opposed to the systems that create and sustain harm, or create platforms by which folks can harm others and not be held accountable. Systems that even would benefit folks not being held accountable, right? Like, that's what's important, is what are we doing about these systems at play today, and how do we dismantle those? Like, what role do we play in dismantling and then reimagining new systems? There's nothing wrong with using that word, y'all. Dismantle is not a bad word. We have to dismantle. We have to tear certain things down so we can reimagine and build certain things up, right? It's okay. And I hope that, at the very least, folks take the time to read A Letter from a Birmingham Jail. At the very, very least. It's just so critical. We talk a lot about, allyship and the role that we should play. I mean, King was just he's just a genius. Like, he outlined all of this already. I could go on and on and on, but anyway, my point is, happy MLK Day weekend. I'm really thankful if you're listening to this. Shout out to all the first and last time listeners. Shout out to our sponsors, because we have sponsors now, y'all. Did you hear the ads last week? We were reading ads. It's pretty dope, right? Shout out to my wife. Shout out to Emery. Shout out to the team. Shout out to the access point, and shout out to the group chat. Yo, our shows came back this week. Y'all, like, come on, y'all gotta rock with us. Like, we have some really incredible content that we're putting out. I'm hoping that you're checking it out. Check out the show notes. It's gonna all be in there. Of course, it's a See It to Be It. So the next thing you're gonna hear is actually not gonna be See It to Be It. It's gonna be, we're gonna tap in with Tristan, but then after that, we're gonna go to See It to Be It, and then we'll see you back here. Okay? Talk to you soon.
What's going on, Living Corporate? It's Tristan, and I want to thank you for tapping back in with me as I provide some tips and advice for professionals. This week, I want to discuss questions to ask in an informational interview as a follow-up to our tip on 3 ways to jumpstart networking in the new year. When you're conducting informational interviews, you want to create a list of questions to help guide the conversation and solicit information to help you in your career or throughout your job search process. The questions you choose should show your contact that you have a genuine interest in their career, the company they work for, and the industry at large. But you also don't want to try and stump your contact, making them feel embarrassed or uncomfortable. Steve Dalton, the author of the book The 2-Hour Job Search, provides a framework called the Tiara Framework that helps structure your thoughts and help you better facilitate the conversation. Let's walk through it. First is trends. These questions help you get a bigger picture of the industry. A couple of examples of questions you might ask would be, what trends are most impacting your business or field right now? How do you think your business or field will change most dramatically in the next several years? Next is insight. The questions you ask here provide you with a better understanding of the position and employer. Here you can ask things like, what surprises you most about your job, your field, or your employer? What's the best lesson you've learned on the job? From there, you want to ask questions focused on advice. By asking these, your contact can provide you with some strategy tips. These questions would look like, what can I do right now to prepare myself for a career in this field? What do you know now that you wish you would have known when you were in my position? The R stands for resources. These questions provide your contact with an opportunity to give you next steps. You might want to ask, what resources should I be sure to look into next? What next steps would you recommend for someone in my situation? The last A stands for assignments. These questions can guide things you may want to include in your resume, cover letter, LinkedIn, or interview answers. A few examples are, what project or projects have you done that you felt added the most value? Have any projects increased in popularity recently at your organization? This framework positions your contact as an expert and allows your conversation to shift in tone and depth. This helps increase the chances that you will turn them into an advocate for you. Thanks for tapping in with me today. Don't forget, I'm now taking submissions from you all on career questions, issues, concerns, or advice that you think may help others. So make sure to submit yours at bit.ly/tapintristan. That's bit.ly/tapintristan. This tip was brought to you by Tristan of Layfield Resume Consulting. Check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Layfield Resume, or connect with me, Tristan Layfield, on LinkedIn.
My guest today on the show is Hermence Matsotsa. Hermence is CEO of Ubuntu Speaks, LLC, a DEI and global health workforce development consulting firm dedicated to building the capacities and competencies of career professionals. The firm uses evidence-based, cross-cutting, hands-on workforce performance development training strategies leading to self-efficacy and positive work performance outcomes. Ms. Matsotsa is a trilingual French, Spanish, and English professional with more than 20 successful years in global health technical advising, DEI, and cross and intercultural communication expertise. Hermence, thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here today.
Well, I am excited to have you. And so I am just, we were commenting before we started recording that today is World AIDS Day, the day that we're recording this.
Yes.
And so I'd like to, in honor of that, start with, your expertise and experience in global healthcare and what led you to that field.
Okay. A global, this day is very special to me, not only because of my 20 plus years in this field, but also personally. I lost my uncle my freshman year of college to HIV.
Oh, I'm so
And
sorry.
yeah, it was at that moment, even though I knew about HIV prior to that, but when something hits home, it really, really rocks your world. And in my case, me being African, so my mother's African, Gabon, and my father's American, but we were living in the United States here. And my mother being the oldest, when my uncle got sick, she went to Africa. She went to Gabon to help take care of him until his passing. And so it really, it is, it impacted my family. And then when he did pass away, I had a dream prior to him passing away that, and he came to me because I was actually close to him, even though he lived far away. During the summers when I'd go visit, he was my favorite uncle. And so I had a dream that he came to me and said, if there's anything you'll do for me, just let everyone know that this is not how you want to die. And I remember that. And I remember that dream. And the next day I woke up, got a call from my mother, and she was like, your uncle passed away. So and from that point on, I was determined to fulfill that wish of my uncle's wish. And so that led me into, traveling, joining the Peace Corps. So I joined the Peace Corps and did HIV/AIDS programming, and worked in small communities. I was a teacher, and so I had little health groups, clubs with the students, and we went around the markets, we went around the community, everywhere, talking about HIV/AIDS and the importance of it, and how to protect yourself and bring awareness. And so, like, that is what I did with communities. And and from Peace Corps, came back, did the same thing in DC, started youth clubs, because I really think that when it comes to health, we have to start with the young people. We have to start with young people because, you know, once you pick up a health behavior, good or bad, the likelihood that, it will stay with you is greater if, if you started young. And so my goal was to really help educate individuals and bring awareness to this epidemic that was really and then at that time was really infecting and affecting communities around me. So working in Washington, D.C. at the time, it had real high rates of HIV infection, not just among gay um, men, but also African American women and men, and also young Latinos. And so for me, it was a epidemic that touched everybody, that touched every aspect of our lives, regardless if you knew it or not. That's how I came. That's how really I, my role and my profession was solidified in this industry. Uh, and so it's very important to me. It's very, and from there went to Jamaica doing HIV/AIDS work, St. Lucia. I was back in Africa. So it's interesting because someone once looked at my resume and said, wow, you bleed HIV. And I was like, okay, that's a crazy way to say something during an interview. Like,
Yeah.
I bleed HIV.
Probably not the right metaphor.
Exactly. I was just like, okay, this is not the place I want to work at. If you feel as though the fact that I've been doing this for all these years is a problem. But I did take, I eventually understood what he was saying, in the sense that I needed to somewhat diversify my portfolio. And then from there, I also started doing polio work and immunization work with CDC. But I've always gone back full circle to HIV/AIDS work. And for me, more importantly, it's the importance of providing tools, resources for individuals to feel as though they're self-empowered to change their lives and have better health outcomes. Like, at the end of the day, that's always what it's been for me. Like, what can I do to get someone to understand that they can one, not get HIV, but also that they can have better health outcomes based on their own behaviors, as well as coming together with their community and bringing awareness of, the issues, the health problems that exist.
Yeah.
I
It's
hope that
interesting.
answers your
Oh,
question.
yeah, absolutely. And there's so much I want to dive into on that because, I hear a lot of young people, and depending on what age you are, right? HIV carries a much different, um, kind of a different connotation in your mind, right?
Right, right,
So when the AIDS epidemic hit, I was in my formative years, right? I was in grade school, middle school. Right.
right,
And I remember very clearly, I think it was like in sixth grade, I think when Ryan White died, and he was from Indiana, and he was kind
right,
of the only thing anybody knew about Indiana at that time was Ryan White. But one of the things that strikes me as interesting is when you talk to younger people now, they don't really understand the
They don't.
impact that the AIDS epidemic had on, an entire generation of people, maybe 2 generations of people. But also, it's hard to even imagine, now we see commercials on TV about, you can take these medications and get your viral load to 0 and you're completely, you can't even transmit the virus. But, 30 years ago, 40 years ago,
Yeah,
HIV was a death sentence, and it was, in
exactly.
your uncle's words, it was a horrible, horrible, um,
Way to
horrible
die.
way to
Yeah.
go, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, I'm curious, having done all this work in public health, and now we're in the middle of a global pandemic once again,
Mm-hmm.
um, with a slightly different, set of stigmas and connotations around it. Um, but how do you see the parallels between what we're dealing with right now with COVID and what we were dealing with, you know, 35 or so years ago with HIV
Right.
globally?
I does actually, sadly, there are a lot of parallels. In my view, one is this idea that it's someone else's problem. When
Mhm.
and being in this field, I found out about COVID early, prior to March and February, because I was connected to a global health community. And I'll never forget being on a call where it was just like, okay, something's happening in China, and there's a virus, outbreak in China. We need to do something about it. How are we going to communicate it to the people? Literally, that's what was said on this call, and everybody was just like, "What's going on?" And that call was a good 2 hours long, of everybody just kind of like not sure what it was, but panicking. So that was in January, and I remember just thinking to myself, okay, the most important thing, I remember asking the question, how is this going to be communicated not only to the health providers and the hospitals, but how is this going to be communicated to the communities? And everybody was like, well, every country is responsible for how they choose to communicate this information. And I sat back thinking, oh my goodness, because it was
Yeah.
just like, all right. And so for me, I automatically went into this mode like, people need to know, people need to be aware. And so, just like around HIV, when you tell individuals, at the time, people felt like if it's not directly knocking on my door or impacting me, if it's so far away, then I don't need to worry about it. And during that time it was, oh, only gay individuals are get HIV. I'm not gay. And then it went to, oh, African American, poor African Americans are getting HIV. That's not me. Or poor. So it's like, it's always, if it's somebody else, then I shouldn't be worried about it. And I feel like that's what happened with COVID. In the beginning, it was like, oh, it's happening in China. We shouldn't, it's not going to get to our shores. We shouldn't worry about it. Oh, the outbreaks are in Europe now. Oh, we shouldn't worry about it because it's not happening. Oh, the majority of individuals who are getting it are old people. So, okay, young people shouldn't be worried about it. And then it's African American. So it's just like, it's this thing where instead of us being worried for each other and taking precautions and having empathy and coming in as a community, as a people, to address this pandemic, or to, at the time, HIV, we fall back in our silos and our communities and point fingers as though, it's not going to affect us all. And so those are really the similarities that I see between the two. And then, of course, the the rush to, once it is clear that this is something that impacts us all, the rush to come to have a communication, like a messaging, and also like how the government, various different governments are dealing with it. Around when HIV came out and it was to be, I honestly can't say the American government was like gung ho, we're going to put funding, we're going to put money into this and take care of the people. No, it was like, well, gay people shouldn't be gay.
Right. Reagan
And
Reagan was
so
hostile. I mean,
Reagan,
that whole
oh my
administration was very
gosh,
hostile to the gay community.
exactly.
and basically
Very.
said, well, it's their fault, right, for being sinners.
Right.
That's what happens to you.
Yeah. And
um
religion plays a role in it,
yes, and the
unfortunately.
parallels, now that you're talking about it, the parallels are stunning, right? Because even
Yeah.
within the American administration, at the start of the COVID pandemic, it was like, well, yeah, but it's just New York, right? And they're
Exactly.
not our people,
Exactly.
even though the president was from New York, which is curious,
From
right?
New York.
I
Right.
mean, it's interesting how quickly we can divide ourselves up and how quickly we can draw these
Right.
lines around us versus them,
Right.
right?
And then
When
we
we
made
don't want to deal
wearing
with the
masks
problem.
political. Like
Right.
just like wearing a condom became political, even though
Political.
condoms were introduced back in World War II, you know. But all of a sudden wearing condoms became, a political thing. Like
Yeah.
it was just weird. And then now, like, wearing masks is a political thing, and I'm just like, it's a mask, it's going to protect us all. So those, for me, those are the parallels. And at the end of the day, it's fear. And it's, and when people don't know what's going on, because they're mixed messaging that's going around, they retreat. And often it's comfortable to live in that fear bubbles, like what I like to call it, because oftentimes you're not alone in that fear bubble. And so the individuals that you're with, you guys can come up with ideas and conspiracies to make yourself feel better and to
Yes.
continue pointing the finger out,
Yeah, and
you know
sometimes there are whole television networks dedicated to that premise.
so yeah, it's
Yeah. So,
yeah,
you know,
so
running with that just a little bit further, because you've worked on, global health initiatives, I'm curious how much of that sentiment of that it's not my problem or it's your fault if you're sick, that seems to be a very particularly, perhaps not exclusively, but particularly American approach to dealing with infectious disease. Have you found that to be true, or do you see similar responses in other cultures as well?
no, there's definitely similar responses, definitely. Thing is, it's not just to the United States. It's not just something that is common um, to Americans. No, it's very global in the sense that, I mean, it's different. I feel like other countries and communities have really learned from the lessons of pandemics and epidemics, and the way things were handled in the past, and really decided to take it, initiative to really educate individuals when it came to COVID-19, educate their community. So now they're in the forefront, whereas the United States is still lagging.
Mm.
However, stigma and discrimination is, I mean, it's a sad, common, factor that plays in public health throughout the world. There's stigma around HIV/AIDS. There's stigma around, not just here in the US, but in all the countries that I've ever worked with. There's stigma around polio. I did a lot of polio work and immunization, even cancer. So it's like, once again, when people don't understand, you know, the health issue, when the messaging that's supposed to come from, the government, that's supposed to come from the agencies that are helping the communities, the leaders, is all over the place. And then when people are associated with a particular health issue and stigmatized for it, then this is where we end up, where, finger pointing, where nothing really gets done, where more people end up dying, where we don't have the answers, and all we can do is bicker about it. So it's not just common to the United States, but I feel like when it comes to COVID, though, um, we were supposed to lead on that, like hands down. I honestly think with the CDC, with the um, vast expertise and health knowledge that the United States has, and the the number of public health professionals that are not only in the United States, but that are Americans who are living abroad and stuff. we should have been leading on this. Like, there's so many reasons that we have led in other ways during other health issues, even HIV, AIDS. There's no reason we didn't take the lead on COVID. Um, but a lot of it is because government played a big role as to how the messages were to be disseminated to the people. And whereas in other countries they decided to listen to the health experts, um, we chose the other way.
Right. It's interesting because I used to work in IT, and I remember people who, in information technology, and I remember the people who kept the servers going, right? They would say, like,
Right.
if we do our job, nobody knows we're here. Nobody understands why they're paying us, right? If we do a good
Right.
job, nobody understands why we're here. And if we do a bad job, nobody understands why they're paying us, right? Nobody understands why we're
Right.
here.
That's a good way. Yeah.
And I think a lot of times the government, these government functions are similar, right? If they're out there
Hmm.
doing a good job, it becomes part of the fabric of our society, it becomes something that we can take for granted, right? And then we
Right.
wonder, my gosh, why do we have this big bloated government? Why do we have all these people working around the clock, to protect us from these things that are never going to come to fruition, that are never going to happen, right?
Right.
Um, and so then, we start to wonder, like, what are we paying them for? Because they're doing their jobs. But then recently, right, we've seen when they don't do their jobs, then, or they're not allowed to do their jobs, right? Then it's a whole different set of questions, same
Yeah.
questions, but from a different perspective. What are they doing? Why are they
Exactly.
paying? Why are we paying them for? Clearly they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And, I think it's one of those things where, um, I would like to go back to taking the CDC for granted. Can
Yes.
I say that? Like, I
Yeah.
I miss not waking up every day and wondering if the CDC is going to make an announcement. And,
Yeah.
like, those are things that normal people, normal everyday people who are not involved in public health policy
Right.
really shouldn't be all that concerned with on a day-to-day basis. And yet here
Right.
we are.
And and having worked with CDC, there are amazing health professionals and specialists and doctors. Like, CDC is not just Atlanta where I'm at, or CDC departments within the health department. Programs within the health departments, but CDC is all the footprint and the impact that CDC has made is felt all over the world. And so is WHO, and so is UNAIDS, and so is all these international global agencies. And, even USAID when it comes to, PEPFAR funding and Peace Corps. So, like, a lot of these agencies are like, their impact is felt, but because the work oftentimes is done in a manner that um, is really making a difference, we as Americans here don't hear about it as
Right.
often, right? And so, just like you said, but when it's not happening right, then that's when we hear about it, rightfully so. And I just I left CDC in 2018 to start my own global health consulting firm, and I always knew that eventually this is the direction I would go into. But working with CDC, I as a as a country facilitator and a technical trainer, I worked with thousands of international public health um, professionals, from communication, from data management, from immunization and like, all across the board. And these were individuals who were from different countries around the world, and who are being brought to CDC to be trained and provided the tools and resources, then go either back to their countries and really do the work that they've been trained to do with the resources, but also go to other countries and help other countries. Our goal was to eradicate polio and to give immunization to children, and to you know deal with various different other issues, like I said, HIV and all of that. And you felt as though that everyone, for the most part, at CDC and connected to CDC and with WHO and these agencies, had good intent. And it was for the betterment of the world. you genuinely felt that. It wasn't always perfect, and it wasn't always done in a way that led to sustainability like we wanted to. But you knew that people genuinely had positive intent. What COVID has revealed now is that while we were everywhere else building this, helping to build infrastructures, well, somewhat sustainable infrastructures, and helping everyone else out, and and really building the capacity of other public health professionals there, and providing them the funding and the resources, it wasn't being done here.
Mm,
And that is really what is disheartening, because COVID really showed us that our health infrastructure is fragile.
yeah.
From overworking our public health professionals, our doctors, our nurses, our systems, our healthcare systems, to I'm not going to use that word, but to not allowing the specialists within CDC, within the health departments, give out the messages that will effectively help individuals make proper health decisions when it came to COVID, to
Right.
not even providing PPE resources, efficient resources, to places that needed them. That
And in
really
some
was
cases,
eye
making it
opening.
more difficult to get PPE and
Exactly,
pitting the states against
exactly.
each other for those resources. And
Right,
as you're talking, one of the questions that I had coming into this interview was, how did you make that leap from, public health to equity, diversity, and inclusion? But I am hearing in your messaging and in your voice that these things are inextricably linked, and there's no detangling them. Is that correct?
right. Exactly. Like for me, my first, I would say my first grown up experience in this work, because my father worked, was also Peace Corps volunteer. He did international development work. My mother was very much a community organizer, a community, advocate. Like my mother was like in the nursing homes helping, individuals. So like that's been Ubuntu, which is the South African philosophy of human interconnectedness. That is the philosophy that I was raised in. That's the philosophy that made me who I am today. And so my first experience on my own, where I was like, I can fly and do this, mom and dad, on my own, was when I was in Ecuador. I went to Ecuador, spun the globe, my finger landed in Ecuador. This is my junior year, was tired of school. I decided to go to Ecuador. Didn't speak Spanish, not a lick of Spanish, right?
Amazing,
But I knew they spoke
amazing.
Spanish there. But one thing I knew is that I had this philosophy in my heart. And this was the idea that in order to be accepted in a community, I had to first respect individuals for who they are, see them for who they are, learn from individuals and value them, and realize that regardless of the fact that I'm American, I was there to learn from others. And so, going to Ecuador, I mean, it was tough. It was a tough year. I ended up I was there to plant trees and do reforestation, which I knew nothing about, honestly. I just wanted to find a way out
Uh-huh.
of school. And, but when I got there, I was different. I ended up living in an Afro Ecuadorian community. So, yes, the people looked like me. We were all Black. However, I was not Ecuadorian. I barely spoke Spanish. I didn't have that Latino Ecuadorian culture. And so it easily could have been like, okay, this is too tough. I'm going to go home. But I realized that in order for me to successfully plant a tree, or in this case, teach literacy, which is what I ended up switching to, teaching individuals how to write their name, identify their name on a list so they can get an ID to be able to vote. In
Wow.
order for me to have been able to do that, I had to put myself out there and and have people teach me and understand the nuances that come with culture and cross culture, interculture, and how to communicate, not just verbally, but body language and the customs. I had to respect the people I was living with. And so, in all the work that I've done since then, it's always been about seeing the people for who they are first before I impose what I want to do, before I ask to, provide them any kind of health services. It was about knowing where people are at, seeing them for who they were, respecting them for who they were, loving them even when they didn't love me yet, for
Mm-hmm.
who they were, and learning from them, not just the language, but the customs, the norms, the social norms, the collective regard that existed within the communities, and having them be the one to decide to bring me in, and then at that point collaborate with me to help them, develop systems and programs that suited them. And and the reason I bring that up is because one thing that often is missed in the work that we do as global health professionals is this idea that you can you can have the same impact regardless of what's happening in the cultural norms and po- political strife, or everything else. Like, you can just go in as long as you have the buy-in from the political system, the government, then you're good to go. And that's not the case, because regardless of how tight the government or oppressive the government may be on a community, or their country, if you go in with this idea, and I always tell people say, does this work? Oh, yes. They will nod their head and be like, yes. But really, they mean no. As soon as you leave, they're not going to do it. Are you going to vaccinate your child? Yeah. You're going to come tomorrow? Yes. They don't show up.
Right.
you know, exactly. Are you working with, are you gonna use condoms the next time you choose to have sex? Oh, yeah, definitely. But then you find out that this is a woman who really is not empowered enough to ask her significant other to use a condom because she fears possibly being hurt if she does, or
Right.
someone who gets more money if she doesn't use a condom and she needs that money to feed her children. Like, so you have to understand that. And that, I think, often is what's missing. And then, I always say, if you can learn statistics and biochemistry, you can learn a language. I mean, I'm just one of
Absolutely.
those. You can learn a language. And so, too many of health professionals, particularly I feel like American health professionals, forget the importance of learning a language. And you don't even have to leave the country for you to be able to use the language you learn. But let's get real. English is not the only language that's spoken in this world. And so learn Spanish, learn French, learn, Mandarin, learn like Portuguese and whatever, and learn local languages if you go into a community. I used to go to villages all the time, like in northern part of Nigeria, wherever I did my work. And although I brought a translator with me, an interpreter with me, excuse me, I brought an interpreter and someone to help me, really teach me about the way of the people, like I like to call it. Um, but I still knew how to say hello in that language. I knew how to say hello, thank you. And in some languages, I see you
Mm.
and I am here for you. Like, I knew how to say that on my own. And that carries a lot of weight when you're coming as a foreigner, when you're coming as a stranger, or in some, in Togo, they say as a Yovo, you're coming in and asking people to work with you. It carries a lot of weight when you make the effort to show that you understand and respect their customs, even if you may not know
Yeah.
the depth of it.
And you're dealing with some very personal issues as well, right?
Right.
And so it's not like you can just come in and be the expert
Right.
when you're talking about people's bodies and people's sexual
Mm-hmm.
habits,
Yeah.
or sexual activities, or their, their most intimate relationships.
Right.
And I love what you said about, if you can learn all these things, you can learn a language. One of the things that I tell people is, if you can learn public speaking, or you can learn Excel spreadsheets, you can learn empathy, right? Empathy
Right.
is also a skill. And we
Right.
tend to see that, a lot of times as, well, it's something that you have or you don't have, right? And that's not true, right? It's not a third eye. It's not,
Right.
it's not being left-handed versus right-handed. It is a
Right.
skill, and you can practice it and you can build
Right.
it.
Yeah.
And, it sounds like in all of the work that you've done, you've started there, and that's led you
Yeah.
other places.
It has. And that is one of the reasons why I felt like my time at CDC was great. You know, I feel like with the organization, I was able to make the impact that I wanted to make. But I also wanted to be able to do this on my own in the sense of, and not be, restrained by the bureaucracy that exists within government agencies, within international agencies, and be restrained by, you know, the politics of it. Even though as an entrepreneur, you still have to deal with a lot of that. But I didn't want to have that or to feel muzzled, you know, and I wanted to, to be compassionate, to have empathy without being seen as weak, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and be able to practice all those skills that I learned and just be just be that public health professional that believes in the people. When I was in Togo as a Peace Corps volunteer, one of the first cultural experiences that I had so many of them, but one of them was the name. I came in introducing myself as Hermence Matsotsa. That's my name. That's what my mother gave me. That's my name. That's what I've had since birth. And I got there and I remember introducing myself, and one of the women that was, that had brought me in and who had been assigned per se to, introduce me to the community. She was like, "Oh, that's not your name. Don't say that." And I was like, "What?" She was like, "That's not your name. Here, that's not your name." And I was like, "Oh, why not?" She was like, "Oh, the chief is going to give you a name. That's not your name." I was like, that's what my mother gave me, but I didn't say that to her. I was just like, okay, but in my mind, I had those Ally McBeal, moments where I was like, what?
Yeah.
That's my name. Like, oh, you remember the show, right? So
Yeah, the
inside,
cutaways, and then she'd tell you what she was really thinking, and then you go back. Yeah.
exactly. So I was just like, how dare they want to change my name? But I understood that had to be a purpose and a reason for this, right? And so she was like, "Oh, you'll get your name in a few days. No worry, you'll get your name." So I spent a week, almost, oh no, more than a week. It was like 2 weeks. I started going to the schools. Nobody was calling me. Like nobody addressed me by my name. It was either, if they addressed me at all, it was the American, l'Américain, l'Américain. So, and I was just like, they all know my name. Like I think they do. Like Peace Corps said they told them my name, and no one was calling me, and people were just really observing me from a distance, right? And so then eventually, about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks later, someone knocks on my door and says, "Oh, American, the chief wants to see you." So I'm like, okay, of course. When the chief asks to see you, you go. Like you're the only foreigner in this village. You're not going to say no to the chief.
Right.
So I go, and I had already, did my research and study. Like you have to dress a certain way when you see the chief. It has to be your best outfit, And so I did that, and I'm taken to the chief, and he has everybody around him, indicates for me to sit down, and I sit down, and then he says, "Welcome." And in my head, I'm like, I've been here for almost 2 weeks. You're just now saying welcome to me. But you know what? I'm not the arrogant American right now, So like in my head, all this stuff was happening. And I could
Right.
hear my mom's voice saying, be quiet, just keep your mouth shut, right? And then He was like, he looks at me and he tells everybody, from this day forward, you will call her Imanatu. And everybody starts cheering and screams Imanatu. And that's my name now. And I was like, Imanatu, like, didn't explain to me what it even meant or anything. And so then I get up and, I, do the traditional bow, and I'm taken out. And the lady was like, congratulations, you got the best name ever. And I was like, okay, what does my name mean? Like, what does it
Right.
mean? And she's like, oh, it means the one, because I was in a Muslim community, it means the one who believes in the people. I said, the one who believes in the
Wow.
people. She was like, yeah, it was Muhammad's mother's name. She believed in the people. So Imanatu means the one who believes in the people and who is for the people. And I was just like, okay. And I asked her, how did he come up with that name? He was like, he asked everybody. I said, he what? He was like, yeah. That's why people watched who I was and how I moved. And that's
Wow.
the name they came up. They realized that I was the one, my name should be monitored because I believed in the people. And for me, like, it's still an emotional experience and I can recall it because that's essentially who I was, am, and continue to strive to be. The one who believes in the people, the one who's for the people, who believes that the people themselves collectively together can resolve problems, can, given the knowledge, the skills, and the resources, can come together and be one. And that wouldn't have happened if I would have listened to my thoughts and been like, this is a crazy culture, what they're about to name me. Like, if I would have just like
Right.
let all of this other stuff, come into that, because it was, at the end of the day, it was a beautiful moment. And then after that, like, the only time I knew that someone was coming to see me or whatever, foreigner into my village or my other Peace Corps volunteers, they were the only ones who called me Hermence. Everybody else called me Manatu. When people came to visit, they were like, oh, we want to speak to Hermence. They're like, who? You would have to say the American. And, and I share that with you today because that is, for many cultures, it's about who you are and not specifically what you choose to be, to call yourself or be. It's who you are for the people, how you fit into the collective, how you fit into the community. So it's this, I am who I am because we all are. We are intrinsically bound in each other's humanity, in each other's experience. And if, until we recognize that, we will continue to have pandemics and and health issues and, societal issues and race and problems in this country when we are busy thinking that we are not part of each other's lives, that we are not bound by each other, that your experience doesn't affect me in some way.
That we are somehow on parallel
It's
timelines that coexist and that we
exactly
don't, that we never
right,
cross. Yeah.
right,
Oh my
right.
goodness. What a beautiful story. And
Thank
I'm
you.
sure I'm not the only one listening to it thinking, wow, I wonder how bad I would have screwed that up and my name would have been like Town Jerk or something. But for them to have watched you and for them to have teased out
Right.
exactly who you are and for you to have shown up
Hmm.
so authentically as you, I
Yeah.
think speaks volumes about the kind of person that you are as well.
Right. And we all can do that. It requires realizing that we are bound up in each other's humanity, that you have to see the humanity in each other. So when you show up in a space that you're not familiar with, you humble yourself. You can take up space without being the center of attention. And that's what, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, that we both do, it's, this is why for me, it's important. it's important for me to talk about cross and intercultural communication in the diversity work that we do, and not just verbal, but nonverbal, because that's how we communicate half the time, is through what we say and how we act and what we do. And the way we do that is very much based on our own experiences and cultural background and all of that. But when you show up in a space with someone else who is, quote, different from you on the surface, you have to be willing to humble yourself and be curious enough, genuinely curious enough to want to know not only what makes that person different from you or unique from you, but what commonalities exist between the two of you that is deeper than what we see or what we hear sometimes. And that aspect of letting ego run our lives, I think, is one of the reasons why sometimes as Americans we get a bad name overseas or in other communities. I think that is also one of the reasons why we have difficulties, coming to the table and listening to each other, regardless of how powerfully different our point of views are. Where we say that, we agree to disagree really doesn't mean much, because when we do disagree, half the time that ends the conversation. So it is about being able to be in the space, but not feel like you have to be the center of, and be that elephant. I don't know, but
No, I understand. And
yeah,
and I think it's true. Well,
yeah.
Hermence Imanatu, did I pronounce that correctly?
Imanatu, yes.
Imanatu Matsotsa, thank you so much for
Thank you.
your time, your expertise, and for sharing your stories with us today. I greatly appreciate it.
And we're back. Listen, I have to thank Amy Seewaniger. Look, we have not been able to get our schedules together, but we're going to come back because I love our, what's the word? Rat-a-tat? Is that it? Rat-a-tat? Because right now it's a lot of rat, no tat. Do you know what I'm talking about? Look, if you know that reference, if you know the reference I just made, hit me up on Twitter. I got something for you. But no, I miss Amy. We're going to bring it back where we're like co-hosting this thing. Y'all, we tired, man. It's tough out here. It's a tough 21. It's a tough 2021. And when you're only 16 days in, golly. Take care of yourselves, y'all. Until next time, I love y'all. This has been Zach. Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.